with me the loving and fraternal greetings of your brothers and sisters who about 14 hours or so ago met together at Moreton Bay to remember our Lord Jesus Christ. Mark and I joined Moreton Bay last year after our family ended up being there. We had been with the Wilston Ecclesia for something like 35 years, and the recorder of the Wilston Ecclesia asked me also to convey their greetings to you as well. For your information, perhaps Brisbane has about 13 or 14 ecclesias in the city of some 2 million people in its wider area, and the Moreton Bay Ecclesia was formed by Wilston because we simply got too big for our hall, and so that's not a bad reason to form a new ecclesia. Brothers and sisters, we come now to conclude the series of studies on the life of Jacob, and we come to the highlight of it really here in Genesis 32. And we're going to see that Yahweh's own commentary on what happens here in Hosea 12 is illuminating. It may in fact be new to some of you, but it's illuminating as to what happened here when Jacob wrestles with an angel. Now the story is familiar, isn't it? It's very, very familiar to us. But the issues are critical to our own salvation, as we shall see. Now, we left off in our Sunday school session this morning sort of the time when Jacob makes his wonderful prayer, and I think we can all relate to it. He says in verse 10 of Genesis 32, "I am not worthy of the least of all the mercies," the Kesed, "and of all the truth," the Emeth. They're the two words that are used in the Hebrew in Exodus 34, verses 6 and 7, by God to describe his character. That sums it up. The Kesed and the Emeth. The divine mercy, the loving kindness, as Rotherham, I think, properly interprets, translates that word. The loving kindness of our God, matched by his faithfulness, his stability, his truthfulness. And so we've got Jacob reminding God and himself of the wonderful characteristics. I'm not worthy of any of the blessings that I've received. And so he goes on to pour out his heart in his desperation in these circumstances as Esau comes with 400 men. He thinking, of course, that he and the lives of his family are in jeopardy. Well, of course, he's wrong, but that's what he thinks. And so what follows is the longest night in the life of Jacob. We have these sorts of times in life, don't we? The longest night in his life. Because you read the record of verse 13 of Genesis 32, it says, "And he lodged there that same night." Now, what he does hereafter is to send forth at least 5 bands. So he's got his servants, he gives them hundreds of animals each, and he gives them strict instructions, and he sends them off in the direction of Esau, to the south, with strict instructions as to what they are to say to his brother. So he spends the whole night choreographing the way he's going to save his family from disaster. Now, of course, you know, this is typical, isn't it, of us? At least he's prayed before he does the choreographing. He took out an insurance policy before he prayed, however. But at least he's prayed. But, you know, he didn't need to spend that long night running around in ever-decreasing circles. He could have just gone to bed and left it to God. Because that's exactly what happens in the next chapter. Left to God, Yahweh redeems him from the hand of him that was stronger than he, to use the words of Jeremiah's dream. But of course, we all know a bit about this. We know about choreographing, don't we? We know how to set in order things to get it done. I'm going to save myself. I'm going to get it done. Well, he's about that. You see verse 21. "So went the present over before him," 5 lots of them, "and himself lodged that night in the company." It's the same night as verse 13. Read verse 22. "And he rose up that night." He doesn't get a wink of sleep during this night. Not one wink of sleep. Too busy managing the event to try and redeem him and his family from disaster. You know, there's an interesting insight into Jacob's mind in verse 20. In verse 20 we read this. he instructs his servants and he says, "And say ye moreover, behold, thy servant Jacob is behind us." Then we get an insight into what he was saying in his own brain. He doesn't say this to the servants. You know, he's given them instructions. He sends them away. This is what he was thinking in his own mind. The second half of verse 20. "For he said, I will appease him with the present that goeth before me." Let's just stop there. There's a particular Hebrew word that is used 4 times in this verse. For example, that phrase where it says, "I will appease him," the 2 Hebrew words there are kafar, which means to cover, and pani, which means the face. So literally translated it would be, "I will cover Esau's face with the present that I have sent before my face." All right? So there's the second occurrence, the word there, before, pani. So I'm going to cover Esau's face with the present that I've set out before my face. And afterward I will see his face, pani. Peradventure he will accept my face. So 4 times the Hebrew word pani is used. It means the face. Now think about that, brothers and sisters. What is he saying? Where's God come into this? Where does the Father's face come into this? Well, guess what's going to happen to Jacob? He's going to spend the rest of that night looking into the face of an angel. That's what's going to happen to him. And he's going to find, he's looking at the most important face you can ever look at, the face of God, represented by his angel. So you see, he's got a few things to learn, as our beloved brother Jacob, with whom we can relate very well. Got a few things to learn, but he's learning. You know, but he does something that you and I, brothers and sisters, many of us in this hall are doing right now. He does something in a moment which we need to continue doing until the dawning of a new day. When he does come face to face with the angel, he grabs him with both arms and refuses to let him go until he gets a blessing. That's going to be one of the great lessons that will come from our exhortation this morning. But let's come back to the end of verse 22. Maybe the whole of verse 22. "He rose up that night and he took his 2 wives and his 2 women servants and his 11 sons, and he passed over the ford Jabbok." Now Jabbok as a name means pouring out or emptying. And this was going to be the place where God was going to pour out of Jacob self-reliance, his scheming to redeem himself, his ideas as to how he could combat the problem of Esau. All of that's going to be poured out of him in the events that follow. He's going to be emptied of himself, is Jacob. And it happens here significantly at this place, Jabbok, which means just that. So he took his family and he sent them over the brook. And he sent over that he had. Now think about this. You've got to put yourself there. You've got to try and understand the way he was thinking and ask yourself, well, why would he do that? What would you do in this situation? He knows Esau's coming with 400 men. He's already broken his own camp up into 2 as an insurance policy. Now he puts them all over the Jabbok and they head south into the teeth of Esau. Doesn't sound very courageous, does it? What about the father of the family? Where should he be in this situation? Well, he should be out the front, shouldn't he, leading his family into the teeth of danger? Does it sound courageous to you? Well, you see, he's at last realised that all of his arrangements, all the choreographing, all his preparation is useless if he doesn't find the angels he saw in verse 1. If he can't find an angel to guide him through this, he knows that all his preparations will be a waste of time. So this is not cowardice that makes Jacob stay behind Jabbok while the rest of his family is heading into the teeth of danger. This is desperation. It's desperation. So when we read in verse 24, we've got the preparation for this staggering event in the life of Jacob. And Jacob was left alone. Just pause there, brothers and sisters. You know, we are most sorely tested, are we not, when we're alone? I am. I'm most sorely tested when you're not around me. I don't have a great deal of trouble walking in the way of the truth when I'm in your company. You're sitting down with me and we're talking or eating together. I can behave myself most of the time. But it's when I'm alone that my relationship with God is most sorely tested. And I don't think I'm a stranger or an orphan in that regard. I think all of us go through that. When you don't have any other person around you and your behaviour is dictated by your conscience, your realisation that you're in the presence of God or otherwise, that's when we're most sorely tested. So here we have Jacob in that position. He's left alone. Now we're going to very carefully analyse verse 24 because, to be honest, to be frank, it's not all that well understood. I've read some ridiculous things in Christadelphian writings. I've read, for example, that the man that he's wrestling here is Esau himself. Come on. How ridiculous is that? But that's the kind of nonsense that we sometimes read about this. We've got to get it right. And we can get it right. I mean, Scripture interprets itself. We don't need to impose any opinions on it. It interprets itself. And we are told in Hosea chapter 12, and we're going to go to that a little later on, we're told in Hosea 12 that it's an angel. It's an angel. And by the way, this angel has the power to touch someone's hip and to dislocate it. Try that sometime. Even if you're Esau. So clearly this is an angel that Jacob is wrestling with. So why does it say a man? See what it says there in verse 24? And Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of day. Now there are two things that we need to get right here. It says a man, there's got to be a reason for that. And it says something else. It says this, that the man, who we know was an angel, wrestled with Jacob. It was not Jacob who wrestled with the angel. It was the angel who came and wrestled with Jacob. So why is that important? Well, it's extremely important. Because we've been talking about this man's life as a type of our life in the truth. The struggle that's gone on from the beginning of my life in the truth was not my doing, brothers and sisters. It was God's doing. It was He who began the struggle in my life. When the truth began to make its impression on my mind and set up this contest between flesh and spirit, and the wrestling process has gone on ever since, that wasn't me who started that. It was God who started the wrestling in my life. And so it is for you. So it's very important to get that right. It was not Jacob who started the wrestling. It was God. So why a man? Why not an angel? Why not just say it was an angel? We know it's an angel. Well, because you see, we're also being taught something very important about the way God works in each of our lives. And we've learned a bit of this along the way in our study. God works in our life. The wrestling process which goes on day after day after day in our life to mature our characters, to develop our faith, to confirm us in the way. That wrestling process, it's a daily thing, isn't it? That process is largely played out in the arena of men. When was the last time you saw an angel? When was the last time you spoke to one? Well, occasionally I do say some words to my angel. It's usually an apology. But when do you last deal with an angel? You don't deal with angels, do you? You deal with your brothers and sisters, and you deal with the people you mingle amongst at work, in shopping centres, the street. wherever it might be, whatever your occupation might be. You're dealing with people out there. And you've got to wrestle every day to make the truth work in your life. You've got to make decisions every day, choices every day. It's a wrestling process, isn't it? But it's done in the everyday affairs of human life. And that's why the record says here, there wrestled a man with him. So God starts the wrestling process, but it's played out in the arena of ordinary, everyday life among men. Jacob's just spent 40 years wrestling, hasn't he? Wrestling with Laban, the deceiver. So that's our experience, isn't it? There is a precision here that is just astonishing, brothers and sisters. Just in one verse, a precision. And we've got to get this right, because this is how God deals with the Jacob in all of us. But there's something else in that verse. See what it says at the end of the verse, verse 24? There wrestled a man with him. We know what that means now. Until the breaking of the day. The margin of my Bible has got until the ascending of the morning. So what day do you reckon is being referred to here in the bigger scheme of things? Well, it's talking about the dawning of the kingdom age, isn't it? The day for which we're all looking, yearning, isn't it? And you know, our wrestling, which God started, beginning of our life in the truth, is not going to come to an end until the breaking of the day. And what we have got to do, brothers and sisters, is to hang on like Jacob did, even though it's very painful. So let's just have a look at what happens to him here. Verse 25. And when he saw that he prevailed not against him, now let's just get this right. This angel is about to touch Jacob's thigh, and it goes at right angles. I won't attempt it here because you might have to carry me out of the hall. But his thigh goes at right angles. Anyone ever had a dislocated finger? Probably. Somewhere along the line. Pretty painful. I've had one, you know, your finger's sort of like this. Someone comes along, grabs it, pulls it out, puts it back in the slot. What about a shoulder? What about a hip? You know what happens when you dislocate your hip? Your sciatic nerve is squeezed. And you'll spend the rest of your life with sciatic pain. And so serious will that be that, like Jacob, for the rest of your life you'll limp. He walks away. He limps away from Peniel, doesn't he? That's how serious it was. Now here is an angel. He could have flicked Jacob off like a fly. If he'd wanted to, he dislocates his thigh with a touch. He just touches his thigh. He's got power to destroy Jacob. He could have said, "Get out of my way." Be gone. But he doesn't. There's a lesson in that. He wants Jacob to hang on despite the pains. He doesn't want to flick him away. See what it's saying here in verse 25? And when he saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh. Now, in fact, the Hebrew words simply mean the hip socket. He touched the hip socket. And the hip socket of Jacob's thigh was dislocated. That's what the word in the Hebrew means, rendered in the AV out of joint. It was dislocated as he wrestled with it. Now, if you've ever had a dislocation of anything, you will know the intensity of that pain. You can't get any worse than the hip. Do you feel like hanging on to anything when you've got a dislocated hip? Do you think? Do you think there might be a tendency to think, well, I'm going to take my hands and put them down on my hip and hold on to that. That's where the pain is. Jacob is not going to let go of that angel, regardless of the pain. And he's in serious pain. And this goes on for hours. He will not unleash his hand. He's got his arms around that angel. He is not going to let him go until the breaking of day. It doesn't matter, brothers and sisters, what the pain might be. We don't have any option. We want to be in the kingdom, then we've got to hang on. We've got to hang on desperately until the breaking of day. That's the lesson that comes out of this experience of Jacob. Verse 26. And he said, let me go, for the day breaketh. And he said, I will not let thee go. Can you hear the tremor in Jacob's voice? This man is suffering. He has got pain shooting up his back and down his legs. Sciatica. Ever had sciatica? It's one of the most debilitating things you can have. They say, brethren, that sciatica is the closest thing that a man can experience to the birth of a child. We know that from Jeremiah 30. You remember Jeremiah 30 and Jeremiah's dream? Jeremiah says, or Yahweh says, why do I see every man with his hands upon his loins as a woman in travail? It is the time of Jacob's trouble. And he will be saved out of it. Closest thing that a man can experience to childbirth is to have his sciatic nerve pinched. And that's what's happening to Jacob. Incredible pain. Sisters, when you brought forth a baby, I mean, you might have had a caesarean section like my daughter has, but if you had a child by natural means, did you feel like sort of hanging on to the midwife with your arms around her or him? Did you? No. So you got some idea, haven't you? Some idea of what agony he went through. Just to hold on until the breaking of day. I will not let thee go except thou bless me. You know what blessing is in the terms of the patriarchs? You know, if a Catholic was reading that, he would say, oh, you know, well, that's a blessing, and the priest will come along and sprinkle water over you or something. No. When you read the word barak in relation to the patriarchs, you know when Abraham receives the first promise, I will bless thee, in thy seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed. So what is an Abrahamic blessing? A patriarchal blessing? Well, we don't have to argue about that. Because when Peter stood up in Acts chapter 3 and he concludes the third chapter of Acts in verse 25 and 26, he quotes from Genesis 22 verse 18. In thy seed shall all families of the earth be blessed. And then he tells us what it is. He says, God has sent Jesus Christ to bless you. Yeah, sent Jesus Christ to bless you. In turning every one of you away from your iniquities. The patriarchal blessing is God getting into your life and turning you away from your iniquities. That's exactly what he's doing to Jacob. It's exactly what's happening. I won't let you go until you bless me. And we've got to hang on until God finishes the work he's begun in us. Because he will. And we'll get there eventually by his strength, not by our own. All we've got to do is hang on, whatever the pain may be. Now look at this in verse 27. He said unto him, what is thy name? And he said, Jacob. Now I want you to get a picture of this, brothers and sisters. You've got to put yourself in Jacob's shoes. You really want to appreciate what's happening. You've got to put yourself in his shoes. He's hanging on. He's got two arms around an angel. Which means that they're face to face. Like this. So the angel's face is here. Alright? Because Jacob is squeezing the angel again. He will not let you go. And the angel says to him, what's your name? And he says, he'll catch you. And the angel says, verse 28, thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel, for as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and hast prevailed. As a prince. So what do you reckon the name Israel means? You ask that to a Sunday school class and they will say, a prince with God. 3 marks out of 10. The word prince there is the Hebrew word sarah. And sarah is one of the 2 Hebrew words used to form the name Israel. El, of course, is obviously El, God. Sarah Look it up for yourself. Means. It means to prevail. To prevail. In fact, it actually means to prevail over. Now, I'm going to go into something, brothers and sisters, which is quite sensitive in a moment. When we get to Hosea 12, it's not for the immature, it's not for the ignorant, but it is for people who understand the Word of God. We're going to see a revelation of what this name means and what that means for you and me. So the name Israel, you want to get 10 out of 10, means to prevail over God. That's what it means. If you say prevail with God, I'll give you an 8 out of 10. It means to prevail over God. Now just hold your horses. I said to you I won't make any statements I can't prove. So just hold your horses. We'll get there. So he changes his name to Israel. But as we saw in our studies, God doesn't call him Israel until he loses the Syrians in Genesis 35, and we saw the reasons for that. Well, let's go on. Verse 29. Got a picture? Jacob and the angel face to face. What's your name? Jacob. Your name's no longer Jacob, it's Israel, because you prevailed with God and men. And then Jacob says, well, what's your name? He says, mind your own business. Mind your own business. Read the verse with me. Verse 29. And Jacob asked him and said, tell me, I pray thee, thy name. And he said, wherefore is it that thou dost ask after my name? Mind your own business, Jacob. I'm not telling you. And then he blessed him. All right? He whispers in his ear, says, yeah, God's promise will come to pass. I will not leave you, nor forsake you, until I have done that which I have spoken to thee of, and I want you in the kingdom, Jacob. That's where I'm going to get you. He blesses him. He's going to turn him away from his iniquities, but it's a painful job. Well, you see, brothers and sisters, there's a lesson in that too. As I said, this angel could have just flicked Jacob away. But he let Jacob prevail over him. He allowed Jacob to hang on. So he prevailed over the angel in that sense. But don't get the idea that this is a relationship of equality, Jacob, because it's not. I changed your name. Don't you bother asking me my name. I'm the one that's working in your life. Got it? So mind your own business. That's what he's saying to him, brothers and sisters. If we're in the kingdom, it won't be you or me that gets us there. It'll be God. It's his work. And he will effect the changes that are necessary for us to be there. And what isn't changed, what is still wrong, if it's acknowledged, can be forgiven. It's his work. He will turn us away from our iniquities. Verse 30. And Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. So why does he change the name? Why does the record change the name in the next verse? See verse 31? And as he passed over Peniel, the sun rose upon him, and he halted upon his thighs, limping, seriously injured. He can't hurry. He can't catch up with his family. They're not limping like him. He's limping. He's got no hope of catching up. In fact, he does. But see the point God's making? You can't save yourself, can you? You can't get there to save your family out of the hands of Esau, but I can. So why do we have two different names in the record? Peniel of verse 30. For I have seen Elohim, faces to faces, as it should read. I've seen Elohim, faces to faces, and my life is preserved, says Jacob. Well, Peniel means I have seen God. I have seen God. And in the Hebrew, in the grammar, it's in the first person singular. It's Jacob, first person singular, who's saying, I've been looking into the face of Elohim, faces to faces. Yes, he had. But what about verse 31? And he passed over Peniel. That's a different word. You know what it means? They have seen God. And in the Hebrew, the grammar is the third person plural. So it's talking about a multitude of people who have seen God. Well, we're going to find out exactly what that means in a moment, because in Hosea chapter 12 we are told that what happened to Jacob here happened for our sakes. It was for us. The lesson that he learnt personally, brothers and sisters, looking into the face of Elohim, was designed for you and me. So we're in the name Peniel. They have seen God. So we then have one more verse in Genesis 32. Therefore the children of Israel eat not of the sinew. The word means the tendon, which shrank. Yeah, because the angel touched it. Which is upon the hip socket of Jacob's thigh unto this day. Because he touched the hollow of Jacob's thigh and the sinew, the tendon that shrank. So why's that verse on the end? What's that got to do with the price of eggs? Or in this case, meat. This is talking about the children of Israel, what they ate thereafter. What do we want to know that for? Well, the children of Israel, children, men in the Hebrew, family builders of Israel, those who prevail over God. People of that ilk don't eat this piece of the hip. You know, brothers and sisters, the strongest part of the human body, apart from the brain, strongest part physically, muscular part of the human body is your thighs, isn't it? So when they teach you to lift something, they say, don't bend over with your back. Bend your knees and use the strength of your thighs. It's the strongest part of the human body. And it's meant to represent, as it does under the law, because the right shoulder, remember, was given to the priest, God's portion. It's meant to represent the strongest part, the actual strongest part of the human body, which is your brain. Your brain is really the strongest part of your body. And you see what this is saying? People who want to build as the family builders of prevailers with God do not put any confidence in the strength of men. And that's why they refuse to eat that portion of the animal's body. They were signifying we will have absolutely no trust in human strength. They eschew it. They reject it. Got the point? Come to Hosea chapter 12 and let's finish our exhortation there. Hosea 12. Now Jacob is the subject of this chapter, as you'll see from verse 2. And so verse 3 doesn't need to mention his name. It's mentioned in verse 2. I want to read from verse 3. He, meaning Jacob, took his brother by the heel in the womb. That's why he's called Jacob. Heel catcher. Took his brother by the heel in the womb. Named him Jacob. And then it says this. And by his strength, the word means ability, power, to successfully exert oneself. By his strength, he had power with God. Guess what the word power is? Sarah. It's the essential word that makes up the name Israel. Sarah means to prevail. So let's read on. So he prevails with God. Yea, verse 4, he had power. Different word in the Hebrew. It's sur, means to vanquish. Vanquish? Yeah, to rule. That's how that word's normally rendered. He had power over the angel. Well, of course, the angel could have flicked him off. But he allowed Jacob to have power over him. And he prevailed. Prevailed? Yes. Yakol in the Hebrew means to be able to overcome. Well, so how did Jacob prevail over God? How did he prevail over the angel representing Yahweh? Did he do it by his own physical strength? Well, he held on. But that's not how he prevailed, brothers and sisters. That's not how he prevailed. You just got to read on. Because it says this. In verse 4. He wept. He wept and made supplication unto him. He found him in Bethel. It means for the second time. The second time around. Genesis 35. He found him in Bethel, and there he spake with us. This record was written for you and me. We're the people of Peniel. They have seen God. Right? The record's written for us. So, how do we know that we're right in this? This could be my opinion, couldn't it? Giving you my opinion. No, I'm not. Look at the last verse of chapter 11 of Hosea. Ephraim compasseth me about with lies, says God, and the house of Israel with deceit. But Judah yet ruleth with God, and is faithful with the saints. So here is Judah ruling with God. How? How was Judah ruling with God at this time? Well, guess who was sitting upon the throne of Judah when these words were written? He's mentioned in Hosea chapter 1. Well, I'll tell you who it was. Hosea chapter 1 verse 1. And the word of Yahweh came unto Hosea the son of Beeri in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. Hezekiah, kings of Judah they were. And what do you know about Hezekiah? In the darkest hour of his life, when he had no wife, no successor to the throne of David, the Assyrians were outside the walls, 185,000 of them, and he was struck with a sickness, and the prophet walks in and says to Hezekiah, set your house in order because you're going to die. And Isaiah turns on his heel and walks out of the palace. What does Hezekiah do, brothers and sisters? Well, the record says he turned his face to the wall. And he wept and made supplication. And before Isaiah got halfway across the courtyard, Yahweh says to him, turn around and go back. He's got 15 more years to live. He'd just been told, point blank, you're going to die. Does God change his mind? There was a sense in which Hezekiah prevailed over God, wasn't there? There was a sense in which he prevailed over God. God changed his mind. Gave him 15 more years. Why? Weeping and supplication. It's the only way it can be done. The only way it can be done. Let me just illustrate what I mean by this, brothers. I said this is not for the immature. And it isn't. Because you can misuse this. You can make a mockery of it. It's not for the immature and the ignorant. This is something that's only understood by people who get to the stage that Jacob is in his life. There may come a time, it's not going to happen every day, there may come a time in your life when this will happen to you. And when you plead with your God with weeping and supplication like Hezekiah did and like Jacob did, hanging on desperately, God finds that irresistible. It is impossible for him, with the character that he has, to resist it when it comes from men like Hezekiah and Jacob. It is just not possible for God to turn away his face. You and I can. You can come to me in desperation and fall down at my feet and plead with me, please, please. You can be weeping. And I can be hard-hearted and say, get away. But our Father in heaven will never do that to men like Jacob and Hezekiah. That's why that record's there. It's written for us. Look at Hosea 12 and verses 5 and 6. Even Yahweh Elohim of hosts, he who will become mighty ones of an army. He who will become is his memorial. Yes, he's going to have a multitude. They're all going to be like that. He's going to work in their lives till he brings them to the end for which he has called them. Verse 6. Therefore turn thou to thy God. Keep mercy and judgment. There's the two characteristics of our God. Keep mercy and judgment. And wait on thy God continually. You know, that first part of verse 6 is not all that well translated. This is how Rotherham translates it. He says, thou therefore by thy God shall return. Young's literal. And thou through thy God dost turn. It's not us. It's God who's working in us. So what do? Well, the end of verse 6 says, wait on thy God continually. And that Hebrew word wait, brothers and sisters, is the word quavah. Q-A-V-A-H. You know what it means? To bind together by twisting. And the imagery is of an angel wrestling with Jacob. The imagery of what's happening in our lives. God started it. The wrestling goes on. All you've got to do is hang on. And the man we're about to remember, in the extremity of his life, hung on with absolute confidence that God would bring him forth from the dead, which he did, so that he might be the vehicle through whom all of those who are the children of Abraham and the family of Jacob might ultimately be blessed and have their iniquities turned away from them.